Thank you for joining us for the AIRC Insight, What is Driving Poor Weapon System Readiness and How Readiness Can Be Improved. Next, please, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This is one of a series of AIRC Insights to engage government, industry, and academia, and of course, other branches of government on issues relating to acquisition and national security and defense. Please, if you have questions, put your questions in the Q&A box, and if you have other issues like technical difficulty or challenges, please put those in the chat box, and that will be monitored throughout. We will take questions at the end of the presentations. Next, please. To set the stage, there are readiness challenges in the Department of War. To give three examples as it relates to the Navy, according to GAO from 2011 to 21, sustainment challenges worsened for 10 Navy ship classes, and that decreased availability and readiness. For the Air Force in 2024, the department did not meet mission-capable rate goals for 42 of 45 aircraft that were reviewed to support military-related missions. And as it relates to the Army, the recent Naval Postgraduate School Symposium on Acquisition, the Honorable Cadenazi stated that no Army vehicles achieved their readiness targets in 2024. Now, this issue is not new to the Department of War. They are aware of it. Next, please. And they are trying to deal with it. IG has recognized this. The IG last year put out a report for fiscal 2026 on the top 7 management challenges for the department. And you'll notice number 3, which we enlarged, is maintaining and improving material readiness that includes weapon systems. So the IG has highlighted this. And next, please, one of the things that the department is doing, and there are a lot of issues that they are trying to tackle, but just as an example of one, is the Army has embarked on a 15-year, $18 billion effort to upgrade the organic industrial base for maintenance and upgrade issues. And the goal is to bring that into the 21st century of technology, according to them. So we're a few years behind schedule to hit that century. But this is an example of the department recognizing the challenge and putting some real money and effort into it. Next, please. To discuss this issue, we have 3 experts in the field. First is Diana Maurer, who's director at GAO, the Government Accountability Office, where she leads oversight and sustainment and readiness issues across the department, including recently reviews of the F-35 sustainment, Navy ship maintenance, missile defense sustainment, Space Force readiness, and mission capability of military aviation, surface ships, and combat vehicles. Then we have Patrick Kelleher, who is Deputy Assistant Secretary of War for Material Readiness, where he is responsible for delivering the weapon system readiness needs for our warfighters, and he is the principal advisor for the department's over $130 billion maintenance program, including adopting innovative sustainment technologies and the department's organic industrial base. And third, we'll have Anna Farberov, who spent 2 decades inside 2 of the world's largest companies, Procter & Gamble and PepsiCo, where she ran complex global supply chains, leading transformation of large organizations and how they adopt and deploy AI, physical AI, and autonomous systems at scale. So she has seen from the private sector what makes technology land inside mission-critical operations, and she will share with us some of the best practices of commercial to tackle these issues. So with no further ado, let me please turn it over to Diana.
Thank you very much, Moshe, and it's great to be here to talk about some of the work that we've been doing here at the GAO. To kind of set the stage a little bit, if we could bring the slides back up, I wanted to kind of baseline things a bit. So we've done a series of reviews looking at the overall condition of sustainment across what we refer to as different domains. And so the slides we're going to show in just a second will display some of those findings from those reviews. So I'll start with our friends on the ground. So this is from our look across Army ground combat systems. And what this chart shows is that over a 10-year period, the vast majority of systems failed to meet their mission-capable goals, even the majority of the time. A number never met their mission-capable goals at any time over that 10-year period, which is both disturbing and remarkable. Next slide. To give you a sense of how much they missed, this shows rather the change over time. You see dramatic declines across the board for the Army in all of its ground vehicles over the course of this decade. We also found that on an annual basis, they were missing their mark in terms of what the Army's goals were for mission capability by a pretty large margin. It's also of great concern. But why was this happening? So we'll go to the next slide to get a sense of why there are these problems. And this is the first of what you're going to see a series of what we call the measles chart. So what you're looking at here is along one axis, you're having ground combat systems, Army and Marine Corps. Across the other axis are the sustainment challenges that our team identified when they talked to the program offices. And wherever you see a red dot is an area where there was a problem. So you see a lot of red dots, which is why we call it the measles chart. In this venue, we're not going to walk through this in detail, so I would focus on the words in the red on the right-hand side. For ground combat vehicles, we found 4 widely pervasive problems. One, there are problems with maintenance, typically delays in performing maintenance, particularly at the depots. 2, there are problems in getting sufficient number of parts, so part shortages and related issues. 3rd was a shortage of trained or skilled maintainers that was nearly universal across the systems. And technical data was also a problem we found widespread in the ground fleet. Next slide. We also looked at ships. This is from a report that came out a couple of years ago. We are in the process of updating that report, so we'll be looking for an updated version of this measles chart early next year. Similar problems in the surface fleet for the Navy, maintenance delays at the depot. The Navy also had some pretty significant problems with unscheduled maintenance, parts problems across the fleet as well, both in terms of shortages, delays, as well as obsolescence. And we'll talk about that in just a second. And also within the Navy, they also had problems with a shortage of trained maintenance personnel. And that was something that we found both in the civilian workforce at the depots, workforce that performs a lot of the maintenance. Next slide. This one's even busier because we're looking at about 4 dozen different aviation systems. So a lot of dots, a lot of measles here as well. In the aviation sector, we found systemic problems with maintenance in terms of delays of maintenance, a lot of unscheduled maintenance, parts, also a problem here. In fact, there's a whole host of those problems you see in the circled areas in terms of diminishing manufacturing sources, parts obsolescence, part shortages, unexpected replacements of parts and repairs, as well as continued shortages of trained maintenance personnel. And I also point out for the aviation system as well as the sea systems, we found similar problems in the ground environment in terms of overall declines in mission capable rates, as well as large gaps between what was desired and the expected performance. The one caveat there is the way that the Navy at the time of our last report was reporting operational availability and material availability is a little different from the other services, but the trend line was not good. So broadly speaking, there are some significant problems in terms of these weapon systems being able to be ready when they're needed to meet when they're called upon to perform their missions. You can close out the slides here. So I just want to talk real quickly about some of the broad themes that we found as to why this was happening. What are some of the key drivers of this poor readiness? Some of the key drivers were structural. Some of this is a function of a shrinking industrial base. So the parts that are necessary to sustain and maintain these systems are built in small or sometimes large industries within the US or at a contractor and subcontractor level. That industrial base has been shrinking, so that's a problem and contributes to lack of spare parts. And other things that we saw over the course of the last couple of decades is the services have moved, and the department as a whole has moved towards more of a just-in-time approach, sort of mirrored what was going on in the private sector in terms of delivering parts just at the time that they're needed. That does not necessarily work very well at all when there is a surge capacity or there is a surge need. So there are some problems there. Some of the issues that we found with sustainment are rooted in poor practice in acquisition. So the acquisition process was often late to need. It tended to produce systems that were highly individualized, which meant that it was very difficult to use parts from one system to another. It's also very difficult to upgrade systems or link systems one to the other. That created problems both in terms of mission capability as well as just the ability to execute on mission. Another key theme is that you get what you plan for. We found that in far too many circumstances, hope ended up being a sustainment strategy, and that was not a good plan. So, for example, if you were to look back at the initial plan for the littoral combat ship and compare it to where we are today, the department was not able to deliver on the hope, and that was in function of the technology not being there at the time it was needed and having, frankly, very unrealistic expectations about the need to maintain and sustain that system operationally. You can say make a similar case for some aspects of F-35 sustainment. Another common theme that we've seen is that you get what you pay for. And by that, I mean, what we've seen across the readiness enterprise, and more specifically in the sustainment enterprise, is that mission needs were often out of balance with the available resources. And that's ultimately a political issue around devoting, where the department is making decisions on where to devote the funding. But all too often, sustainment was seen as playing second or even third fiddle to other priorities within the department. There's definitely a need to develop and field new technology. But if you don't develop sound strategies and you don't devote the necessary resources to sustain it, then mission capability is going to be a problem. The last thing that I'll emphasize, and then I'll stop for now and turn on to other speakers, is that aging fleets. In a lot of places, particularly in aviation and the sea sectors, we've seen aging fleets where systems are being used well beyond their expected life. That creates significant problems for sustaining those systems when, in some cases, parts that were never meant to be replaced need to be replaced, or the original manufacturer is long out of business. So it's very difficult and expensive and time consuming for the department to find the necessary spare parts. To fix these problems, there are a number of different recommendations from GAO reports that we've issued over the years, but they're broadly speaking, they're around addressing those particular problems, ensuring that there are enough people, ensuring that there are enough parts, and ensuring that maintenance is being managed and performed on a timely basis to get the department on a better track in terms of meeting mission-capable goals and needs. And with that, I will stop and hand it off to Pat.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you very much. I know there are going to be a number of questions. So Pat, first of all, I saw you nodding in agreement on occasion, so I have a feeling we might hear some of the same things, but how does the department view the readiness challenges? And as a second question with that, how does the department tend to address these challenges to improve readiness rates?
Thanks, Moshe, and thanks to AIRC for pulling this together, and really thanks to Diana for saying everything I was going to say. So I'm done. No, I think the nice thing is, as I got into this position almost 2 years ago now, really some of the formative and foundational reference material that we started to look at were the GAO reports, and so I think we are in line, in sync with everything that Diana laid out in terms of the causal factors. I'll build on that and provide a little bit of repetition, but a little bit of I think just a different perspective in terms of how we are thinking about what she rightly has identified, what GAO has rightly identified as some of the causal factors, and then I will get into some of the things that we are doing about it, because we need to solve this problem, and it is a problem. And so when I as I think about readiness, and as Diana highlights the historical context, what's evident to me is that we cannot continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. It's basically what we've been doing for the last 20 years. And so, while each of the services is really doing good things with regard to maintenance and readiness and doing the best that they can within their perspective, I think one of the key attributes or one of the key driving factors that has led to degraded readiness is what has been what I would call a disaggregated approach. And so in many instances, we find the services trying to solve their own readiness challenges, where in fact those readiness challenges are much more cross-cutting and require a much more integrated solution than one service could bring into realization by itself. And so, taking that approach, and obviously within there are challenges across the board. We've been being very deliberate about developing a more holistic and integrated approach to build on what the services are doing, on a daily basis, because the challenges are real. And Diana talked about the legacy platforms and talked about the obsolescence that is just an ongoing challenge simply by virtue of the fact that we've extended our lifespan of these platforms well beyond what we thought. And as she said, we never thought the thing would break, and it's been 37 years since anybody made it, and we need like 2 of them, and it's not economically viable. We've got to find a place for it. And so you couple the legacy platforms, challenges with obsolescence, what she said, Diana said, with maintainers, and just simply the volume of work, and then you throw on top of that operational tempo. If anything, as our readiness rates have declined, our operational tempo has increased, and certainly there's a cause and effect there. But we continue to use our weapon systems in ways that exceed how we originally planned to employ them. And so that's just simply a reality that we have to deal with, because it's not going to change. Hence, what I said at the beginning, which our approach is to think about things more holistically, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. One of the other reasons I think that we have seen readiness decline is because that the sustainment community, generally speaking, and this is the Department of War, has difficulty quantifying how much readiness your next marginal dollar will buy. And so when we say generally how I need to invest in readiness, we, the department, have had difficulties quantifying exactly how much for exactly what return. And so therefore, it does not compete well against other requirements where you can say, hey, for X amount of dollars, I'm going to give you Y number of new bombs or new missiles or new aircraft. Readiness has been sort of been more nebulous in how we have articulated it. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to change as well. And because of that, as Diana mentioned, we have underinvested in logistics and sustainment, readiness in particular, for the last 25 years. So we have accrued a significant, what I would call, sustainment debt, because for decades now, the department has underinvested in the logistics and sustainment infrastructure necessary to maintain the level of readiness that is required for us to fight and win. And so we've got to make some big investments in order to offset that debt. And as you said, Moshe, at the beginning, the department's moving in the right direction. So making progress there, but it still remains an ongoing challenge. I think, and I think one of the other things that has sort of contributed, to the sustainment debt, and this is sort of a double-edged sword. It has been, frankly, the exceptional work of maintainers and sustainers and logisticians over the last 20 or 30 years, because there was never a challenge, an operational problem that logisticians, maintainers, and sustainment professionals across the board could not overcome. I mean, we fought 2 counterinsurgency operations. We dominated across the board, and there was not a logistics problem that couldn't be solved. And so I think that also contributed to, at least unconsciously, into maybe a lack of imperative to invest in logistics and readiness, because we always get it done, because we always had gotten it done. But the difference is now, whereas 20 counterinsurgencies we dominated in 3 domains, we are challenged in 5, and for the first time, all 5 or 6 domains, depending on how you count them. And for the first time in our history, we're facing 2 nuclear armed peer competitors. And so that which has succeeded in the past, because we were able to dominate, will not succeed in the future, therefore necessitating, in my opinion, a different approach. So what are we doing about it? One, we've initiated a readiness campaign plan, a readiness and weapons systems campaign plan to holistically integrate the things that are going on across the department. And so we're working on finalizing that, and that will go hopefully to the Undersecretary for A&S here in the relatively near future to really align across the services, across DLA, and across the department, how the department is approaching overcoming these readiness challenges. Number 2, we've developed an AI-enabled readiness assessment tool that we call Monument. And so we have now categorized over 100 different weapon systems, and this allows us to be very quantitative about what is degrading readiness, down to the NIN level. And so we can be very clear and specific when we identify requirements that we must invest in these 5 widgets to improve readiness of these end items by X% in this amount of time. And you can't argue, yes, we will have discussions about the validity of the data and the conclusions that we are drawing, but those are good discussions to have because we're seeing it from our perspective, and we want to have the dialogue so that we can come to a mutually agreeable quantitative solution so that we collectively can put that bill on the table so that we can be more effective in articulating the requirement for resources and doing what we need to do to drive readiness. So that tool is really, it's phenomenal so far. We've plugged in some things and it's spitting out options for us. It's developing. We are using AI to develop optionality across the department. And again, we take that back to the services or the weapon system, the program managers, and then we have a conversation about the things that we're doing. Now, the other thing that we are doing along the lines of data is quantifying our performance and capacity across the organic industrial base. So we are taking the data and we are being very clear and specific about what we are accomplishing and how the OAB is performing. If the DepSec were to ask me, as he did 8 months ago or so, and said, do we have capacity in the organic industrial base? Well, my answer was yes. But he didn't ask me for any details, which was good because I wouldn't have had them. It was sort of like, yes, we feel like we do, and we anecdotally believe we do and know that we do, but we can't quantify that. And along the same lines, if the DepSec were to say, how's the OIB performing? Good. But we don't have a way to quantify that and then use that as a metric to guide investment. And so we're using data to do both of those things: quantify our performance, quantify our capacity, and use that as a tool to help weight the effort where we need to drive readiness, and that weighting includes resourcing. And at the end of the day, I think what the data allows us to do is it gives us visibility, which enables us to be more quantifiable in accountability. And so we can be very clear and specific about the questions that we are asking from the Department of War and come to mutually agreeable solutions with the services. Because if there's not a problem, then hey, over to you, services to do what you got to do. But many times, as we are finding, the solutions are cross-cutting, and conversely, the solutions that services have individually put in place in some instances are also cross-cutting, and we need to elevate those as well. And so the readiness campaign plan, driving quantitative readiness assessment with our AI-enabled readiness assessment tool, our AI-enabled performance and capacity assessment of the organic industrial base, I think allows better and more effective enterprise alignment on priorities and solutions, and so that we can be very clear about it. So I'll pause there. I know that was probably a lot, but it was a super good lead-in from Diana, made it very easy. But those are the things that we're trying to do. We are looking for solutions. I tell my team all the time, if it's not quantifiable, measurable, and accessible in the next 12 months or so, don't do it, because we need to bring results, not more talking.
No, Pat, that was great, and that was a lot, but that's good. I think that's what people want to hear. And I think there will be much interest in seeing that campaign plan once it's signed out, and hopefully is a public document that people can really sink their teeth into. So looking forward to that. Sometimes when we have these conversations on hard policy issues, we tend not to perhaps look at if industry, and I don't mean industry by defense contractors, right? I mean industry that has nothing to do with defense, how they're dealing with some of the issues and what might be applicable. And because of that, we asked Anna to join us. So Anna, two questions to start. One is, does industry have similar challenges in logistics and maintenance? Because industry, they might not have tanks, but they need their trucks to deliver or their planes to fly, or they don't get business done. And if to the extent they have had similar challenges in these areas, how are some of the ways that they've addressed them?
Hey, Moshe, hey, everyone. So I'm smiling because this is all very familiar. Everything Diana described happens in industry as well. Think, parts you can't find, equipment that's been in service longer than the people maintaining it. Maintenance strategies built on hope. That's all very valid. Industry faces same challenges. And I can share an example from PepsiCo that operates one of the largest industrial networks in the United States. So think manufacturing, warehouse, logistics, distribution, one of the largest fleets in the country, right? It's 24/7 operations, hundreds of facilities, thousands of manufacturing lines, massive, complex maintenance problem, legacy equipment, labor shortages, right? It's all the same, and with a parallel constant pressure to increase uptime, reliability, throughput, resilience, etc. So this is all very, very similar. I think the difference is in the consequences, because if PepsiCo loses a production line, then we lose some revenue. But then if a weapon system goes down or is unavailable, the consequences are different. I think we share the exact same problem. Consequences are bigger. And there's one more thing that we share, and that is that we cannot stop operations. You cannot stop a manufacturing line to go through an upgrade process. You need to upgrade while running the business, because you cannot stop in both cases, industry and defense. So I think similar problems. Industry has some experience in the last decade in addressing it, and I think that can be highly applicable. And that's probably, I'll kind of transition to the second question. I think I can share a few lessons that worked in the last decade for the industry. The first one is technology is rarely the problem. Usually it's the adoption, right? Technology exists, it's out there. Most transformations fail because we're trying to cramp a massive change into an already overloaded system. And that's exactly what you both kind of, Pat and Diana, described. The system's overloaded. So the approach has to be very pragmatic. What are small operational wins that we can feel immediately, and the operator on the ground can feel immediately, Patrick, exactly like you said. What can we do in the next 12 months to build that confidence and to build that muscle so the field can believe that this is something that helps them and they can adopt it? And Diana, you talked about maintainers and qualified people, and that is exactly kind of one of the problems that we solve first, and that's a low-hanging fruit. So I can show an example. Instead of forcing the frontline to adopt a full enterprise solution, we actually gave them very simple digital work instructions through kind of a mobile device that they have. So that means that you give them the knowledge of your best and most experienced technician, right? To everyone, you kind of modernize, democratize the knowledge. And then immediately what you see is training becomes faster. Knowledge is more standardized. Procedures are searchable because they can access it instead of calling somebody. Errors are decreased, and then the experienced technician no longer carries that entire industrial knowledge in their heads, which is what we see happening. And those technicians, by the way, are retiring. So that whole knowledge goes with them. And that creates momentum, because once they see the impact on their jobs, this is not another transformation, this is real. And then they're open to doing more. I think another example is when you think of manufacturing environments, we've used computer vision to detect product buildup. So think, you can monitor a conveyor flow constantly. You can identify contamination risks and detect abnormalities. So you're replacing a person that needs to walk the line and kind of have a look and manually see if something's happening with constant monitoring. So you're not replacing the human, you're augmenting them, and you're giving them an early awareness to something that might happen before it becomes a big problem, and then they need to deal with it. So I think that's kind of, lesson number one. Change management, bringing the people with you is the bigger challenge than the technology itself. I think a second lesson can be, or what we've learned is data by itself is not enough. Organizations have a lot of data, I'm sure. Defense industry has a ton of data. The challenge is, how do you turn that data into action? How do you close the gap between knowing something's about to happen and to actioning upon it? How do you turn data from something that is historical reporting facing to something that is a decision support mechanism? And that was kind of one of the biggest unlocks that we saw helping around the industry. And I think the third one, which is probably the biggest potential, but also the hardest one, or has longer term implications, is simulation and digital twin as a decision-making tool. So today, what we see is industry deploying digital twin environments that are able to simulate exactly, so replicate the physical environment. And what that means is, before you do an expensive build, before you do an expensive investment in the physical infrastructure, you can simulate and run a lot of analysis and scenarios and what ifs first. So you can see exactly what will happen if throughput will increase, what will happen if the line goes down, what happens if you change staffing, or just play with different assumptions. And that allows you to troubleshoot everything before you actually build it and reduce the operational risk. So that is, frankly, I think the most relevant, probably more of a long-term target that takes definitely more than 12 months. So I would start with things that are more tangible, but then especially in environments when downtime and readiness are critical, then being able to think that you can simulate everything that can go wrong before you actually commit to that. So I think if I summarize, kind of, I spoke for too long, but if I summarize, I think, yes, readiness is a real problem everywhere. But the good news is that it is solvable, and there are playbooks in the industry that are transferable and can help the defense industry kind of, solve some of its challenges as well.
Thank you. That's I have so many questions about how industry is doing things. And some of the things you talked about, like the technology not augmenting walking the line, seems to have potential for even places like DCAA and DCMA that we haven't even talked about and probably won't talk about in that session. So maybe that's a good future one. But jumping to the first question that I see has been posted, we've talked about a lot of issues with readiness. I would ask both Diana and Pat, of all the challenges that we've talked about, what are the top three that, if addressed, would have the biggest impact on readiness? And then Anna, after that, what are the top three that you've seen at both Pepsi and Procter and Gamble that you think had the biggest impact in all the efforts that you've done to improve the maintenance, logistics, and uptime? And let's start with Diana, I guess, please.
All right, great. Thank you, Moshe. That's an easy question. That is a great question. So thinking about the body of work that we've done, I'd have to start with people. And by that, I mean ensuring there are enough skilled people to perform what's necessary to execute the sustainment mission. I know when our teams have been out there talking to folks in the OIB, the uniform maintainers on the flight line, they're incredible, amazing people who are working extremely hard, and they do great work, but there just aren't enough of them. So ensuring that there are enough trained people in uniform, that there are enough trained people at civilian workforce at the depots. That's a workforce of what, Pat, like 80,000 people or something, bigger than the coal industry. So it's a major industrial sector in the US. And then also in the contractor workforce as well. Like there are a lot of competing demands for labor right now in the economy writ large, and even in the defense sector. Like when the Navy talks about they need 200,000 additional people to build out the fleet they want to build, that's just to build the fleet they want to build. They have to think about the sailors to put aboard those ships and the maintainers to make sure they're operational. So that's number one, people. Second is, and Pat, you spoke to this as well, which I think is great. in some respects, it can feel like that the department is drowning in data and complexity within the sustainment and logistics enterprise. Like when geo teams are asking folks for what, how well is the KC-46A working, or how much does it cost to fly the F-35? Like, not only is there data, there is so much data, it's hard to know what to make sense of it. So I think, Pat, the things that you were talking about makes a lot of sense. If the department was better positioned to make decisions about, is it better to spend $1 billion to buy new F-35s, or is it better to put that $1 billion towards buying to address the spare part shortages in the F-35 fleet as it exists today? Like, the data necessary to make those decisions is extremely important. The last thing I'll mention is at least all use Legos. And by that, I mean, right now, between weapon systems and sometimes even within weapon systems, you have Legos and Tinker Toys and Connects and Lincoln Logs and things that do not connect at all. That complicates efforts tremendously for systems to work together in an operational capacity, but it also makes it so that sustaining and maintaining those systems is even more expensive and even more time consuming. So going forward, at least all use Legos, right? There are different sizes and shapes and colors of Legos, but as long as they all snap together in some coherent way, you're going to be better off today and tomorrow. Because one of the things we're learning in the current operational environment is that the iteration of systems, the lifespan can be months. So that means whatever new systems the department is building today need to be upgraded several times in the future, and they need to talk to one another. So those would be my three: people, data, and make sure you all use Legos.
So I love that you brought Tinker Toys into this. So thank you. That was amazing. Pat?
Well, I can bring in Lincoln Logs. I mean, I played with those too. I'm sure you did. So, but yes, no, that was good. I would agree with Diana, maybe with just a little bit different nuance. I would put parts number one. And the reason I would put parts number one is because generally speaking, what we see sort of as a macro degrader across the board is our inability to get all of the parts when and where we need them. And so that there, that multiple reasons for that: legacy platforms, new platforms, lack of suppliers, obsolescence, not economically viable to produce, long lead time. I mean, the whole long list of all of those. But I would put parts number one. And what we're trying to do with our AI-enabled readiness assessment tool is to be very quantifiable about, what parts. And then we've got another tool that we're using, that we're developing to help us find better solutions. So if I know I need a new widget, now I'm going to I used AI to help me identify the widget that was most impactful across the enterprise. I'm going to use a separate AI tool that we have in place, that we are using, to help me identify where else can I get it made. Maybe there's alternate NINs that fill the same function. Maybe there's companies that could make it but aren't making it because they don't know they could make it. And so we're being very proactive so that we can reduce obsolescence challenges, reduce the long lead time, reduce the things that I'm talking about. And some of that might just be aggregating demand across the department so that we can place a requisition in a quantity that is economically viable to produce. Because what we do now is, the Army will order one widget, the Navy will order a widget, the Marine Corps will order a widget. Nobody wants to make only one widget because they don't want to make any capital investments, and they're not going to make any money on just producing one. But if the department can aggregate the demand using AI and be more proactive, we can help, reduce some of those parts challenges. So I'd say parts. Now, I would also say, if we don't have a parts problem, we quickly have a manpower problem, because we will find that the LIMFAC will no longer be as much parts as it will be people to put the parts on. And I will say right now, definitively, that, number two, where can we make a difference, is the people in the organic industrial base. So we have personnel deficiencies in the organic industrial base that is going to impact readiness, is impacting readiness. We simply do not have a sufficient workforce to execute the work that was planned to be conducted. And so we're going to fall behind. We're falling behind, and we're going to continue because there's no short-term fix to increasing. Sure, we could go out and hire a bunch of folks. Maybe that would help, but they still all got to be trained. because, it's very difficult to replace the welder with 40 years experience with, a guy who knows how to weld just get out of school. So we need to fix that problem. And then number three, I think it's sort of the along the lines of Legos and Ticker Toys and Lincoln Logs, but I would call it organizational alignment. And so what we see at Echelon is that everybody sees the problem a little differently. And because everybody sees the problem a little differently, and because there is not necessarily, other than from the using unit, a single entity that is arguably being held accountable for readiness of a particular platform, you have a disconnect between sort of the effects of readiness or degraded readiness and how you can fix it. Using the Pepsi example, your truck breaks down, you're going to see that impact in lost revenue right away. But if I don't do the right things over time to maintain my F-16s, that cause is disconnected from the effect of maybe having an F-16 that can't execute its mission 2 or 3 years down the road. So there's sort of a disconnect between the cause and effect, and then the organizational alignment from the service and secretariat level down to the program office, so that everybody's seeing the same problem and going after it in the same way. And that's one of the things that data is really enabling us to do, is to be very clear and specific about our questions. So it forces quantitative answers and it drives action, because you can't sort of run away anymore. Oh yeah, it's really bad, and we're going to do something about it. We're going to work together, and we're going to get after it. Well, no, I want to know how you're going to make more of these widgets so I can fly more F-16s. And so that will drive the organizational alignment, I think, which is the other thing, would round out my top three. Over.
So before going to end, I just want to follow up on one thing there, because you raise a really interesting question. So who is responsible for readiness? How does it flow? Is it the PM, the ultimately new PAE? Is it the guys downstream that get the vehicles? Who in the department has the responsibilities?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But when you diffuse responsibility, you also diffuse accountability. And so, yes, the services have responsibility for readiness. And yes, we have responsibility for readiness. And yes, the program managers have responsibility for readiness. But again, because everybody sees the problem differently, the squadrons worried about mission capable rates. Can I fly all my planes today? And will that change in the next 5 minutes? But left of all of that is the life cycle management that really, the system sort of incentivizes efficiency over effectiveness. Program managers don't make decisions because, they're going to drive readiness in 3 years. They're going to make decisions about cost, schedule, performance today, and not necessarily think through, arguably, the implications of those longer term implications of near-term decisions that they are incentivized to make because they are held accountable for cost, schedule, and performance. So it is that continuum then that we're trying to align the enterprise, vertically, instead of sort of diffusing it horizontally. We can look at it more vertically and be very clear about, hey, the department wants this readiness, this operational availability percentage of X for F-16s. Why are we not getting it? And then we can be, as I said, very clear about what solutions we're going to drive and who's going to do them. And we are going to drive that through a couple different governance forums that we execute. So I hope that helps. Over.
So it sounds like we need maintainers, all the way downstream, more into the upfront design of the systems, is what it sounds like.
Well, yes, 100%. And I think, the acquisition community would tell you that we do that. And we do. I don't think that we do it as effectively as we could. When you look at any weapon system and you say that, 75% of its life cycle cost is going to be post IOC or FOC, once we have fielded all the systems, 75% of the cost, those are all downstream costs that are not incentivized, that at Echelon, the enterprise does not incentivize it incentivizes near-term optimization, not long-term optimization, because cost schedule performance is sort of the framework.
Anna, thoughts?
I think it all sounds very familiar. Sorry, and I also think it emphasizes technology is not necessarily the problem. It's the ways of working. It's the responsibility, ownership, working through organizational complexity. So I think, I mean, if I go back, Moshe, your question to me was, what are the 3 technologies that we would start with? And I think I'll go through them, but that's the easy part, right? Technology is out there. That's the easy part. We need to solve kind of the organizational complexity. But I think if starting with just 3 that are the simplest to deploy, I think number 1 is visibility, because you can't fix what you don't see. So that's kind of the foundation. Think sensors, computer vision, IoT, edge devices, real-time asset visibility, because operators spend a lot of time trying to figure out what is happening and what is the current state. And we've learned kind of that you cannot, again, optimize what you can't see. So before AI, before automation, before a lot of fancy words, you need visibility. And that exists out there. That's technology that's been available for at least a decade and probably more. I think the second, Diana and Pat, you both addressed frontline. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough skilled people. The skilled people are actually aging and leaving. And that is one of the most underestimated areas that an industry faces, similar challenges. So digital work instructions, mobile workflows, knowledge capture, AI-assisted troubleshooting. A lot of kind of, the knowledge depends on experienced individuals. So we need to solve it. And experience or expertise doesn't scale. So what is that scalable solution that will allow you to have that? And we've turned a lot of tribal knowledge into operational systems. And that's critical for workforce kind of transitioning, resilience, onboarding, et cetera. Once we have those 2 foundational systems that are relatively easy to deploy, prediction and AI systems would be kind of the 3rd bucket of technologies that I would mention, because there's a lot of hype around AI today, but there are actual practical use cases that can be applied, and they're real beyond kind of the hype. So think predictive maintenance, failure detection, inventory optimization, operational anomaly detection, scheduling optimizations. Those are all kind of quite simple technologies that exist and have been tested on large scale organizations already. This is not something that's not mature. And the key learning there, it's not AI for the sake of AI. How do you translate that AI work and attach it to an operational decision? So how do you take faster decisions, better decisions, more proactive decisions in operations? And that is kind of the critical unlock, which also ties to change management and bringing the frontline on board. Once we have those 3 buckets, the more advanced ones would be digital twin and simulations that I've mentioned. So how do you move from responsive analytics to proactive kind of modeling? And then probably the 5th that I would mention, and I know, Moshe, it's more than you've asked, but Diana mentioned siloed systems. And I think that's highly relevant, because what we see is, we all struggle with the same. We have hundreds of systems. They don't talk to each other. The technology was layered throughout the years, and nobody's going to rip this out and create one system. If we could start with a clean slate, perfect, but we can't. So today, the industry and technology is moving into workforce orchestration and kind of agentic systems. It is how do you layer or have an organizational brain that sits on top of your systems already and does not replace them? Right, and that is how you can unlock more modernizing brownfield operations, which is most of what the defense industry has, but also commercial industry as well. You're not replacing a legacy system. You're kind of connecting and overlaying them through an orchestrated brain, and that is kind of the latest of the technologies that we see today. That is something that still needs to be kind of tested at a large scale. So hopefully, by the time the DoW goes through the first kind of foundations, industry will be able to share the knowledge, vet, troubleshoot, and kind of make the agentic capabilities ready for defense.
Interesting. So we've been talking for about 45 minutes on readiness challenges, in the department, different solutions. We talked about more than a dozen issues, but what hasn't come up is intellectual property and data rights, right? And yet there seems to be this debate that seems to imply that the problem with readiness is data rights and IP, and that it's a silver bullet. But can I assume that if the department had all the IP in the world, we would still have a readiness problem? Is that the case?
I think so. From a geo perspective, certainly technical data can be a significant readiness problem. And we've identified it in some of our work. The F-35 program, for example, Littoral Combat Ship is another example, KC-46A, the Stryker. We had a whole report on vendor lock that came out last year. So it's not a perfect situation by any means. There's a lot of areas where it's very problematic and very difficult. I think if there was a world where the department could get all the technical data for everything for free, there would still be significant sustainment challenges facing the department. So tech data is not a silver bullet. It's an area for continued growth, but just solving that will not solve everything.
It's not the silver bullet. I think oftentimes it's the convenient excuse, frankly. But yeah, are there specific times where it's a problem? Of course. Generally speaking, not a silver bullet.
No, thanks. Now, there's a question that's specifically for you in the Q&A box. Can you provide examples of the big investments the department is making to solve the sustainment debt that you discussed?
Sure. Well, I think, I know that FY27 will see a big bump in spares funding. How that translates, dollar amounts into, are we making sure we're buying the right parts? And again, that goes back to using data. So I think that's one area. Number two, department's making a significant investment through DLA in what DLA calls their Global Resilience Initiative, which is basically, as you think through how you can overcome the challenges of contested logistics. What I said earlier, where we had previously dominated in 3 domains, we will now be challenged in 5. Means we won't have the freedom of maneuver that we have had in the past. We won't have the ability to leverage mass supplies in the way that we have done in the past. And so DLAs and frankly, some of the services, their initiatives to forward position, to forward stock different classes of supply in forward locations in certain theaters. So that they are there and we don't have to move them there, which then competes against other lift. And so off the top of my head, that's 2 areas. Number 3 would be a significant investment over the last several years on, as you mentioned up front, the organic industrial base and modernization. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is aligns, all of that fairly robust funding. The services are going to do what they should do based on their priorities, but at least from a departmental perspective, aligning that so that we are making sure that we are leveraging those investments to achieve maximum readiness effect, if you will. So those are 3 things that come to mind. Over.
Great. And there's one other question here on where can people get information on Momentum, was it?
Monument.
Sorry, Monument.
Yeah, that's our AI-enabled readiness assessment tool. I have to think about that. It's still really under development, and I mean it's behind a CAC firewall. I guess we could write something up. I haven't really thought about that. Well, I have to think through what we can share on that.
Of course, well, understandable if you can't for sure, 100%. Yep. We only have about 5 minutes left, so perhaps give everyone a chance for the last 1 or 2 minutes of thoughts. And perhaps, Pat, we can start with you.
Oh, first, again, thank you for pulling this together. It's a great conversation. Great to see everybody. And I appreciate the opportunity. I think, in the macro, do we have readiness problems? Yes. I think, just as we said, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, we had significant data and data integration problems. Well, we made a lot of progress in the department over the last 3 to 5 years on data. And I am optimistic that given the attention and the attention, and frankly, it's things like this that drive attention on readiness. We've made some steps in the right direction. I think we're going to continue to make that progress. We've got some really good partnerships. I mean, we have analytical rigor that nobody will argue with from GAO. So all I do is I walk around and show that. So, but it's very helpful. And so I think, as I said, these types of forums help maintain that momentum that I think we are building over.
Excellent. Thank you. Diana?
Yeah, just real quickly, I think one thing to always keep in mind is when you're looking at making decisions about where to invest or how the department invests its money, doing things like improving the mission capable rates of the F-35 fleet by 10%. Right now it's about 50% fleet wide. If you improve it by 10%, that means 80 or 90 additional very capable, extremely sophisticated 5th generation fighters that can answer the call. So from a bang per buck thing, that's something definitely to think about. And then last point I'll make real quickly is something Anna mentioned, which is that technology is the easy part. Like every new weapon system is going to require trained people to use it. They have to know how to use it in concert with other systems. They need facilities where they can be stored and maintained, and they need a supply of spare parts to keep that system running and upgraded over a period of decades. So it's important to never lose sight of that fact.
Thank you. And Anna, last word to you, but just to make it a little bit more interesting and absolutely put you on the spot. Yeah. In addition to thoughts, do you have any data on how predictive analytics or some of the other efforts that you have overseen has in fact improved availability or decreased downtime?
Yes. So I won't share confidential data, but we've deployed.
No, please do. We'd love you to do that.
PepsiCo deployed about 400 sensors on critical equipment. So think kind of your most critical motors and pumps, etc., across almost 70 sites in North America. And what we saw is unplanned downtime went to zero. Because what it means is we were able to predict something before it breaks and schedule that maintenance into the scheduled window, right? So think of your car. You want to know that something's about to break so you can put it in the shop before you're stuck on the side of the road. And that was kind of critical. With the digital workflows, we were able to reduce onboarding of new technicians from weeks to days. Right? Usually, typically, it would take us at least 2 months to train a technician, and we've reduced that to days. And the number of errors were reduced by, I think it was 37%. I might be kind of off by a few percent, but it doesn't matter. Big number, right? And that is all by simple solutions that you can overlay, and you don't need to rip anything out. It's not a new system. It is kind of on top. It's already proven. It's already operating at scale. So those are kind of just a few examples, and there's more. With digital twins, we're able to increase throughput by 20+% out of the same building. So you're getting 20% more out of your existing footprint already. No need to add more footprint. We were able to reduce headcount. It doesn't mean that the people were fired, but we have the same challenges. We don't have enough people. So you're able to move people into more productive work. Accuracy. So across the board, any KPI has increased. And if I kind of segue to my final words, I think, yes, readiness problems are real, but they're not unique. And industry faces similar things, and they are solvable. There is a commercial playbook that is highly applicable. It's not the same. Stakes are not the same. Scale is not the same. Complexity is not the same, right? So everything is probably 10 times multiplied, but the principles are highly transferable. So please use your industry friends. We're happy to come and help.
So thank you very much. This is a great discussion. In the 30 seconds, one is the slides will be made available for anyone that wants. I believe they'll be posted, or you can just email and ask. Wendy asked, how should today's discussion inform new acquisitions? I'm just going to take 2 takeaways that I learned from this. One is from talking to all of you, focus on the biggest drivers that, if addressed, will move readiness rates, like workforce. And the second one is how to get Anna to work on some of this stuff to get things down to 0 unplanned readiness time. Because Diana, that was on one of your charts, that unplanned maintenance. If you can get that to even a half, let alone 0, that would be great. So how do we get Anna onto this stuff, I think, is the answer. But thank you all for this conversation. I'm sure we'll have similar ones in the future, but it was really great.